All right, we are here today at Bemis Hall in Lincoln, Massachusetts, to interview one of our outstanding citizens, Jack MacLean, historian, accomplished genealogist, and various other skills. Tell us about yourself, Jack. What brought you to Lincoln?
Well, I grew up here in Lincoln.
Born here?
Yep, I was. I'm third generation in Lincoln, basically.
Oh, really? Really? So your grandfather, you mean?
My grandfather first came to Lincoln in 1907.
Wow. From?
Well, he was originally from Cape Breton.
Okay.
That's where he had grown up.
With his forebears from Ireland, probably.
From Scotland.
Scotland, M-A-C, excuse me. I'm an M-C, I'm a Mick, you're a Mac.
Yeah, the MacLean side was from the Isle of Call, off the northwest coast of Scotland, and probably in 1826 my great-great-grandparents left there for Cape Breton. That's the period of the clearances, of course, in Scotland. And they settled on what will be over 200-acre
Wow.
farm that was a grant from the Crown.
Wow.
And so that was where my grandfather grew up, on that family farm.
Cape Breton Island, 200-acre farm. Great.
My great-great-grandfather
Great.
settled on Cape Breton, received that farm. It was divided between two of his sons, so they each have a little over 100 acres that my grandfather grew up on.
Wow.
And his father, in addition to farming the land, worked as a carpenter.
Carpenter.
And as I heard the story, he was doing carpentry work on a steeple and fell, and died as a result of that. My grandfather at the time was 14 years old, the oldest of 6 children, and basically has to take over running the family farm there.
Wow. And the family.
And yeah, very much.
Yeah.
The family as well. The youngest of those 6 was actually born after
the accident.
my great-grandfather died, so he was the father for that child from her birth.
Yeah.
And so then in 1895, when he's 22 years old, he leaves the farm, because his younger brothers are old enough to
Take it over.
do the running of it at that point. And he comes down to the United States, or as was often called in Nova Scotia, the Boston States.
Yeah.
Because so many would come down to the Boston area.
Yeah, my father's from PEI. He came down years later, early 1900s. Yeah.
And yeah, it's a time period that's one of the larger groups that comes into Lincoln during that time frame.
I would
1895,
think so.
It's also the same year that R.D. Donaldson did his first house here in Lincoln. He came down from Nova Scotia a little before that.
And it's close to the time Bemis is having this place built, and then the church across the way. It's all contemporary.
That's all in that time period.
So, but your people were the poor Scots moving in where these rich Boston merchants were.
Yeah, very much. Obviously, he was not in that sort of financial situation. He's doing various jobs when he comes down here, works on different farms, estate properties, and so forth, worked for the telephone company. Along the way, gets married, has a child.
A local girl?
She's also from Nova Scotia, Chester Nova Scotia. And
Scottish, Irish?
different background, not Scottish. She's a mixture of German, Dutch, and Swiss on her father's side, and English on her mother's side.
But still a Protestant, not a Catholic, so he's stuck within the realm.
Both sides were Protestants, yes. Her family had been Baptist. My grandfather's side, the Scottish, of course, had been Presbyterian.
Yeah.
And as I said, her background was half English, and much of that side actually came from New England and went up to Nova Scotia in the 1760s.
The other way.
And two of the ancestors there were, I found out from doing genealogy research, had no idea originally, but one was a Melvin from Concord, and the other was a Bradshaw who went up from Lexington.
Wow.
So, quite to my surprise, the Farrer family of Lincoln and other families are relatives
Now,
by way of Nova Scotia.
And this is your grandfather we're talking about. Where did he?
This would have been my grandmother's family.
Yeah.
Living
where?
time.
Living where in Lincoln?
Hmm?
In Lincoln, where'd they live?
When they settled here in 1907, they were originally on Page Road. And my grandfather's first job here in Lincoln was as the chauffeur for the Page family that the road is named for. And the Pages owned most of the land on the right side, the east side of Page Road, as well as some land on the west side. The barn of the property was on the west. And the Page house is now on Page Farm Road, actually, the old house.
Yeah.
But there was a Gothic cottage on the property that dated back to the 1850s. And as the chauffeur, that's where they lived.
Sure.
And in that house is where my father was born, right here in Lincoln. And then, I don't know too much of the details, but for a brief time, my grandfather, after they were living here, was a motorman for one of the street railway companies in Boston.
Sure, sure.
So probably sort of like a second job
Yeah.
that he was able to take for a while. And was apparently quite close to the Page family, and continued to live in that house after he got a new job. And the new job was across the street for Emily Osgood and her sister Catherine Stackpole.
Oh boy.
And
you got all of this up there, huh?
well,
Yeah.
from doing Lincoln history, I'm familiar with quite a bit of it, as well as having done a lot of my
get to
family
that, but
genealogy.
let's get your father married. Let's get your father married. Who did he meet, and
Well,
what did he do?
My grandfather worked for the Osgoods as a caretaker, and in 1915 he built a house where I still live here in sort of the center part of town.
Trapelo Road.
That's right. And so that was where my father, for the most part, grew up. And one of his...
Your father goes to school in the little red schoolhouse down there?
He did not.
Ah.
He had all of his years in the center school.
Okay, okay.
It varied how they
Yeah,
worked the schools depending on the time period.
yeah,
But when he was going through, I think it would be like grades 1 through 3 for those who lived in the center and the north part of town, went to the center school. And for those same grades, if you lived in the south part of town, you went into the
that's where
Little
the
Red Schoolhouse.
Winchell kids went to the Red School.
Yeah.
They were in Sheep's End down there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, great.
So he had 9 years in the center school, and then you had 3 years in high school. They had a 9th grade here in Lincoln during that time period.
Yeah, and
So that
Weston,
it wouldn't be as many years that you had to,
Yeah,
the town had to pay for them to
Sure.
go to high school outside of town.
sure.
During his period, the two towns were Concord or Waltham. Weston will come a little bit later, replacing Waltham. So he went to Concord High School and graduated from there. Was his big sport was track, and he held the record for the 100-yard dash
No
for
kidding.
like 15 years or
No
something.
kidding.
For Concord High School.
Wow.
And so had he gone to Waltham instead, he would have met my mother a little bit earlier, probably.
Maybe.
She was from Waltham.
Great. Named what?
Hmm?
Last name.
Taylor.
Another good.
Corinne Taylor.
Another good English name.
Yeah. And so she went to Leslie College and taught
Tufts. Jackson.
school in Waltham.
Oh.
Taught first grade for a number of years.
Oh.
And one of my father's sisters also went to Leslie College. And they were different ages, different
Sure.
classes, but they got together through reunions at the school.
Wow.
One lived in Waltham, the other in Lincoln.
Sure. Sure.
Got to be friends.
Yep. Meet your brother.
Brought Miss Taylor home to meet the family, and so my parents met as a result of that.
That's great.
And
Married soon after, a long time after?
oh, I'd say not that many years after. I'm
Okay,
actually
right.
not sure just what year
Okay.
they met,
Okay.
but she had been teaching for 13 years prior to that. And upon getting married,
What was your father doing?
he was a salesman at that time. And there were different companies he was with, and I'm not exactly sure which one at that point. Might have been like Lipton's or something of that nature.
So he was on the road, you mean?
He would be on the road. And
Yeah.
he had lived in Worcester for a period, and
Yeah.
I guess was back in the house here in Lincoln at that point. He had an older brother who was paralyzed,
Really?
and so he was helping out with a
Helping
lot
him.
of the care
Yeah.
for the older brother. And
And your aunt was around. The sister that introduced him to.
she had done some teaching, I believe in Boston, and then she married Roland Mackenzie here in Lincoln, and so she moved from the house where she grew up to the house he had on Bedford Road.
Wow.
And after that, he was a ophthalmologist in Waltham, and she had been his secretary
Oh, great.
for a period before they got married.
Right.
He had been married before that, and his first wife had died, and So he married the secretary.
That's great. That's great. Now, when is little Jack the first child to come along?
Second one.
Second one.
My brother was born in Waltham. They're in the house that my mother grew up in at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And then after my grandfather died, moved to the house here in Lincoln.
Sure, sure. So you're growing up as a little kid. Do you have any other siblings? There was the...
Just the two of us.
Okay, 2 boys. Yeah. And what happened to your brother? Your brother still alive, or is he gone?
He's in Westboro.
Westboro.
Mm-hmm.
Good. So that leaves little Jack on Trapelo Road.
Right.
You went to school where?
I graduated from the Lincoln schools in Lincoln, Sudbury, and then went to Bates College
Bates.
after that.
Mm-hmm. With a degree in what? What was
History,
Okay. Okay.
and concentration was in American history.
Oh, so you're a historian from way back.
That's my background, and I was particularly interested in colonial American history and in sort of the social life of people.
Mm-hmm. Did you work? Did you have a paying position?
Well, I had been involved in some museum work early on, Orchard House in Concord,
Mm-hmm.
and I was director of the Beverly Historical Society
Mm-hmm.
that has 3 houses that they operate.
Mm-hmm.
And
So you were a working historian.
that was my field, yes. And then I had been doing research in Lincoln history, really coming right out of college at Bates, and went to the Lincoln Library and did research into the old records there to try to get a little more of a feeling of what life was like, and so the everyday experiences. And then later I went out to Illinois where I got a master's degree in historical administration, which is, as I said, museum work, archives,
University of Illinois?
historic preservation.
Which school?
That was Eastern Illinois University,
Okay,
a
okay.
special program that they had out there. And an interesting experience in terms of had a number of trips to museums throughout the Midwest, had an internship at Nauvoo, Illinois, which was a Mormon settlement.
Wow.
From which they
Wow.
went out to Salt Lake City.
Wow.
Whole different experience for me to learn about.
But I can imagine you learned about it. You dug into it.
I
You
did, yes.
You weren't just a casual visitor. Yeah.
No, one of the nice aspects, I was not a member of the church,
Sure.
which did operate the site, and there was they would have some retired couples that volunteered to help out at the location, and one man who was sort of the second in command was not really supportive of having students who were not members of the church
Non-Mormons,
taking
yeah.
part in
Sure.
this.
Sure.
Well, at one of their other sites that they operated, there was an opening that developed for a person to be in charge of that site. And this same individual suggested that I'd be good to be in charge of that. So it certainly reflects my effort to really try to study the religious history associated, and that he appreciated the effort that I
That's great.
put into it.
So when did you come back to Lincoln?
Well, I came back in the early 80s, and
That late? That late in time? I mean,
Well,
it's quite a while now, but...
it's been a while now.
Yeah. So I thought your book dated back to then. It doesn't.
The book was published in 87,
Okay.
and
Tell us about the
so
book.
probably, I guess about 83, I was back here.
Mm-hmm.
And Alki Olson, Ken Olson's wife, was then a neighbor.
From right here. You're right up the street from you.
Yep. And she had been on the historical commission. I'd earlier done some work for them in preparation for creating the Lincoln Center Historic District particularly. And she had been on the commission during that period. And in addition to being a neighbor, knew my interest in Lincoln history.
So this is early 80s now.
Yeah, this is probably 83.
Mm.
And 83, 84 time period. That she approached me to see whether I'd be, and I'd also written some historical pieces for the Lincoln Journal, or I think it was then the Concord edition of the Lincoln edition of the Concord Journal.
Yeah.
And she asked me whether I'd be interested in doing a history of the town.
Nothing existed before yours?
Paul Revere, Paul Brooks's
Oh yeah, Brooks's book was the
View
first.
from Lincoln Hill
Yeah.
had been done.
About when? I'm trying
But
to get that.
that came out, I'd say, in 1970. It was 75 or 76, and I think 75.
Approximately 10 years before yours.
And he was, for the most part, doing a more thematic study, focusing particularly on conservation issues.
Yeah.
So it was not
'Cause that was
intended to be a broad
history.
traditional history of the town.
Because that was the time of conservation. That was Lemire and Winchell trying to divide his land up to cluster zoning. Yeah, so that's about that time.
And Paul Brooks had been on the Conservation Commission with Bob Lemire for many years. That was a major interest of his.
Yeah.
Not only here in town, but in a broader
Sure. That was the
context.
hot topic of the day.
And amazing achievements that we had during that time period in the field of conservation.
That's right. Still ahead of the rest of the country with 80 miles of trails and over half the acreage of the town in conservation. Yeah. So, but yours was a more classical history book.
Very much the more traditional style of history that, type that went back to the late 19th century that people were doing, and we didn't have such a study for the town of Lincoln, even though we're certainly right in the midst of a lot of history here.
Yeah. Who published your book? Was that the Historical Society?
The Historical Society, Alki, as I said, approached me and said if I was interested in doing it, she'd like to underwrite the project.
Wonderful.
So she provided funds to the society to publish it.
And it's still selling today. One can even buy a copy on Amazon.
Yes, that was not available back in 1987.
But that's a pretty good life for a history book, because others followed with something, right? Did Peg Marsh, didn't she do this book about the center here, a pamphlet more? It's more of a
Inheritance by Peg Martin.
Yeah, Peggy Martin, yeah.
And she also did one on the Codman estate.
Yeah.
And she and I had worked together in '84, writing you said pamphlet,
Yeah.
a shorter book similar to Inheritance that was on the history of the libraries in Lincoln.
Uh-huh.
That was the 100th anniversary of the Lincoln Library building.
Mm-hmm.
And the study went back to what were called social libraries that go back to the 1790s, where people subscribed as individuals to social libraries, as they called it, where they basically bought some books together and would share them and so forth.
Sure, the beginning of libraries.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, great.
And a number of other books have been done as a consequence through the years since then.
Now, are you still writing? Is there anything in the works, or have you done it all?
On Lincoln, I still do studies of some of the historic houses in the community for the Historical Commission,
Mm-hmm.
but not something as a sort of published book.
Not a published book.
But those are all available on the internet, or most of them are.
Yeah.
And also, right now, been working on inventories, some of the collections that are in the Flint homestead, where Henry Flint died.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to identify things that might be of interest to the community.
So as an
So
archivist?
it's more of an archives
Yeah.
type of project in that case, yeah.
So you're still active. You haven't hung up your pencil yet.
No.
Well, and genealogy. How did you get into that? Back with the Mormons?
Doing the study of Lincoln, a rich harvest, I was certainly doing a lot of genealogy of Lincoln families. I had dabbled a little bit into my family history before that, but didn't get very far with it. Particularly my father's side, coming from Nova Scotia, I didn't even attempt that.
That's right. I don't know beyond my father from PEI. Nothing.
Mm-hmm.
No information. Yeah.
I knew just a small amount about my mother's side.
Mm-hmm.
As I said, she was from Waltham,
Mm-hmm.
and I knew the Taylor side came over from England in the 19th century, settled in Brooklyn, New York,
Now
and
Waltham.
eventually came here through my great-grandfather being a watchmaker.
Okay, Waltham Watch.
And
Royce Taylor from Waltham.
Royce Taylor's family is not related, but they were very close friends.
Interesting.
My grandmother and Royce's mother played bridge together a great deal.
Wow, that's great.
So, long connection of family friendship, even though it's the same last name, not
Sure.
related.
Yep,
But-
especially that name.
Taylor's definitely
'Cause
not
that's
an
from
uncommon
the
one.
that's from the occupation, a tailor.
Right.
Jillions of them. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, great.
And I did know two other family names from my mother's side. One was Bossuet, French names. Didn't know the background, simply that had French ancestry. And the other was Sherman.
Our Sherman?
And Sherman is an old Watertown
Yeah.
family.
Well,
Family
Sudbury,
legends
Wayland.
that General Sherman was
Yeah.
a relative. Well, he is, although you actually have to go back to England
Sure.
to make the connection. They were
But
cousins who came over together.
But we've got the Sherman House on Farrer Road, Farrer and Oxford.
And yes, so in my early efforts, I had found Sherman in Charlestown. That was as far as I could get. I couldn't figure out where he was born. It turned out, as I finally did get back to doing the family genealogy, he was born in Wayland,
Okay,
then East Sudbury, on Oxbow Road,
probably that house.
Sherman's Bridge Road.
Yeah, well, I know
The
the house.
Shermans in Lincoln
Yeah, I know
are
the
all
house.
relatives, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, Doctor is in there now, in the Sherman House.
Mhm.
Across the street from the other house there with George Travis, Denio House, which had another name that's, I've lost it, it'll come to me. Or maybe that's Sherman Farm. And it's the Adams House.
Sherman
across
is
the
on the
street.
Wayland side.
Yeah, yeah. Well, half in Wayland.
And exactly,
That's right. They pay taxes to both towns.
the line goes right through the building.
That's right. I know the family.
And
Cows in the field there, oxen.
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, genealogy, and our viewers may not realize it, but we are conducting this interview on Halloween.
we are.
And I happen to know that you have some connection to a Salem witch. Tell us about
I
that.
do, yes. Growing up, I had a sense that I really did not have a lot of roots here in New England. I knew the Sherman name, as I said. But in my mind, I was mostly a late 19th century immigrant families coming to...
Canadian, you're a Canadian.
Yeah. But once you get a line and you go back generation to generation, it really expands out.
Yeah, of course, Adam and Eve.
So it is quite amazing to see
What
the
did they
number
say,
of
6
connections.
degrees or something? I don't know. Yeah.
So, April 19th, somebody who was with the Sudbury Company who fought there. Others also who fought on the 19th. However many great uncle was killed on April 19th at Menotomy, now
Wow.
Arlington.
Arlington.
That was, that
Yeah.
I'd have connections like that was just amazing to me, growing up here in Lincoln in the middle of hearing all that. Mayflower, yeah, got a couple that were on the Mayflower.
But the Salem witch in particular.
Somebody who was killed in King Philip's War by the Indians, and his
Sudbury?
wife and children were taken as captives.
Over in Sudbury on
That was
the hill?
in what's now part of Haverhill,
Oh,
where they lived.
oh,
And another ancestor who lived in Andover, which was another big area where there were accusations.
is
So
that right?
number 2 to the Salem-Danvers area,
In Andover.
where there were accusations of witchcraft. And so one of my direct ancestors was accused of witchcraft in Andover, taken to Salem,
Ah,
tried,
ah.
and was hung as a witch.
In Salem.
In
So
Salem.
that's the Salem connection. She wasn't one of the ones turned in by the kids who claimed.
Not one of that group, not one of the first
So
ones,
they
but
reached out to Andover to find another witch.
yes,
They were on a witch hunt.
they very much were, yes. And Andover was, as I said, the second area that really had a lot of accusations going on at that time.
Wow.
But all the trials were
In
conducted in Salem,
Yeah, yeah.
and she was hung there.
Oh boy. What name? I've forgotten.
Mary Parker
Parker.
was her married name, Mary Ayer,
Mm-hmm.
her maiden name.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's fascinating.
And Yes, it is.
especially today, Halloween.
Yeah, I'm on the internet, a Salem witch group that you get emails.
Sure.
And always just before Halloween, the traffic of
Oh, yeah, heats
email
up.
messages really picks up.
Heats up, hits the paper.
Mhm.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. That's wonderful. What a
Well, it
fascinating
wasn't so
story.
wonderful for Mary,
Well,
but
of course
for,
not.
for
but
me,
I mean, the interest now, many,
It
many
is.
years later. Yeah.
and just really fascinating,
Yeah.
now particularly having been a historian,
Exactly.
to suddenly realize, oh, I've got a personal connection to all of these different aspects of early New England history.
Oh, that's wonderful. I find it fascinating myself.
Mhm.
Well, we've done well and you're into your bridge time, but do you have any words of wisdom for the young people who will be watching this in the far future, hopefully?
Words of wisdom.
Advice?
Well, I wasn't expecting that
No, I
question.
know it. I know it.
So I don't know. Hopefully to try to learn about your own past and your community's past, and be enriched by both of those, and try, hopefully, as you're growing up, to make an effort to preserve some of the best of what we have, something that Lincoln tried to do with its conservation efforts and
Yeah.
so forth,
Yeah, with
so
no
that
small
future
success.
generations would be able to enjoy with that which you are given through the community as well as your family ties.
Well, great. Thank you very much. We've been talking to Jack MacLean, one of our utmost citizens, and I hope we'll get to do chapter 2 someday. Thanks, Jack.
Okay.